the ILC Daily Show. My name is Martin Murphy, and with me is Sophie Fisher.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back.
So it's the fifth day of the International Labour Conference, the fifth day that we're doing this show as well. We're very happy to be here. Hope you've seen all the editions that we've done so far. Sophie, how's it going so far for you, this daily show?
It's going really well. I think it's great that we can give these regular updates to conference delegates and also some of the highlights of sessions that they can't attend because the ILC is so busy, it is literally impossible to see everything.
Yeah, I don't know if we can show it later on, but actually it's pretty packed here. It's the lunch break. The plenary just finished. Also this morning we had the third of our thematic discussions. It was on skills for the future of work. After this show, in about 2 hours' time, we'll have the fourth of the thematic discussions. And this one is on, Sophie, if you can remind me, it's on securing sustainable transitions over the life course.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
A very fascinating subject.
Absolutely. And we're going to be live from the Human Rights Room, 2 floors up. And we have a very special guest, including the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, who we're going to interview, but we'll bring you that interview on Monday. So quite a packed day today. If people want to follow us online, if they want to send in questions for the interviews that we're going to have later on, how can they do that, Sophie?
Probably the best way to do it is via Twitter. You can see the hashtags behind me. ILO 100 and OIT 100. Please send us your questions, please send us your feedback. If there's anything you want to hear more about, just let us know and we'll try and fit it into the program.
Absolutely. So we're going to be doing interviews on skills for the future of work. Also, we're going to talk about securing sustainable transitions throughout life, and we're going to be talking about green jobs. So we have 3 live interviews lined up. If you want to start posting your questions, right now we're live on the ILC website, but also on the ILO website, but also on Facebook. Before we start with the first interview, we're going to tell you a little bit about what happened earlier this morning, and I think, Sophie, you're going to take us through the news.
Yep. Thank you very much, Martin. And as Martin said, it's already the end of the first week of the conference. Yesterday in the thematic forums, we saw some excellent and engaging discussions on child labour, and in the afternoon, freedom of association and collective bargaining. Now, if you want to catch up with either of those, you can find them on the ILO website. Just follow the link to live ILC coverage, and below the video screen, you'll see another link to recorded thematic forums. So, the first week has been incredibly busy. We've had visits from more than 30 heads of state and government, and next week we're expecting about a dozen more. Let's take a look back at some of the highlights of this week's high-level visits.
What we are celebrating today is really not an organization. What we are celebrating is a movement.
We believe that through the ILO, social justice will be established in the world.
Let us be reminded that social justice remains a central aspiration for all the workers of the world yearning for a better future.
El trabajo no es una mercancía. La libertad de expresión y de asociación son esenciales. La pobreza en cualquier lugar constituye un peligro para la prosperidad en todas partes.
Cent ans de combat, 100 ans de justice sociale, 100 ans de dialogue, 189 conventions ratifiées qui ont changé la vie de millions d'hommes et de femmes.
Сегодня, вступая в новое столетие, МОД вновь ставит самые важные и актуальные вопросы о будущем трудовых отношений.
Children shouldn't work in fields, but on dreams.
The paradigm shift created by the Fourth Industrial Revolution can help all of us to create a world which is more free, more fair, and more fun.
This year we mark the centenary of the International Labour Organization, an agency born of the bloodshed of the First World War, dedicated to building a better tomorrow.
It's a movement that is summed up and symbolized by the three letters ILO. It's a movement now marching towards the future.
That was a look at some of the heads of states and that visited the ILC earlier this week. Like Sophie said, we're going to have more next week for the second batch of high-level visits. But for now, we want to talk a little bit about the topic of this morning's thematic forum, which was Skills for the Future of Work. And with us is Olga Strieska-Ilina, Senior Skills and Employability Specialist at the ILO. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being with us. Olga, this morning, as we heard, the topic was jobs and skills for a brighter future. First of all, what were the main conclusions that came out of that discussion, according to you?
Thank you, Martin, and hello, everybody. We had a great conversation during this thematic debate. It was a high-level panel discussing jobs and skills for a brighter future from different angles. And, of course, there is no way I can do justice to what they have discussed and what they have concluded here in a very short time. But they all agreed that, of course, there are many challenges. The challenges which are brought by new technologies, artificial intelligence, but also other factors, peace and resilience, sustainable development, and so on. And, of course, this puts a lot of pressure on jobs, on labor market policies, and on skills development, especially reskilling and upskilling, lifelong learning. Everybody underlined the importance of skills development policies. But then they also agreed that the policies and the implementation of lifelong learning, as well as other active labor market policies, they are not automatic. So for this we need regulations, and because the changes on the labor market are happening quite fast. We need fast regulations, we need fast and also smart policies and inclusive policies so that nobody is left behind, and very proactive policies. So it's not really waiting until the problem actually comes, such as unemployment, but rather tackling the problem when it is not there yet. So for example, skilling those people who might be potentially unemployed, or whose work and tasks at their jobs are changing very much. So training them now rather than waiting until the problem comes there. So it's really skilling, it's regulation, as I said, smart and fast. And it's also collaboration and partnership, because they said, of course, it's a huge challenge and there is no way governments or employers, businesses and workers can handle this alone. And therefore, it's a very partnership-like approach in delivering those policies and making sure that everybody has access to training. So if I summarize in really like 2 words, they said skills, 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 and partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. This is what it is.
Very good. Another issue that came up a lot in this morning's discussion it's something that the global report, the Commission's report, the report by the Global Commission on the Future of Work touches on, which is the universal entitlement to lifelong learning. This is a key issue when we talk about skills for the future. Can you tell us what we mean by lifelong learning?
Lifelong learning is actually not a new concept at all. It has been around for quite a while. It's we can say a renewed concept, because there is a renewed attention to lifelong learning. So when we speak about lifelong learning, it's actually all types of education and training which happens during the lifetime. This is as easy as that. But in fact, what we see, it doesn't happen. For some reason, it doesn't happen. And there are many reasons why actually it doesn't happen, because it has to also mobilize the whole range of other policies and complex policies, a good policy mix, so that lifelong learning actually happens. These are incentives for workers to engage in learning. This is making learning actually interesting and attractive. These are also funding opportunities for workers, but these are also recognition of skills. So for example, when we speak about lifelong learning will also mean that this learning has to be life-wide, which means that the whole spectrum of different pathways can bring individuals to their skills and qualifications. Formal pathways or informal. It could be done at school, but it could be also done in workplace, in communities, and nowadays also a lot of edtechs, massive open online courses. They also provide learning opportunities. And this is a huge opportunity which is available right out there. But we need to make sure that there are no dead ends, that there are pathways which are seamless and people can engage into learning. They can recognize and credit their skills, whether they are partial qualifications or full qualifications, and then also recognize those new attained skills on the labor market in form of rewards, whether this is a career or wages and so on. So this is lifelong learning concept in short.
Can I just jump in and pick up on something that Olga said, which is that you were talking about how other policies are going to have to change too. I mean, we've had a traditional structure, which is in the first 20, 30 years of your life, you're educated. Then you work, then you retire or semi-retire. I mean, from what you're saying about lifelong learning, the educational training structures in many countries are going to have to change too.
Yes, and also the policy priorities, the emphasis which were put. For example, if I think about what you just said, my mother had during lifetime 2 major jobs. By now I have had 5, and I consider myself lucky. My son, who is 30 years old, he has already had around a couple of dozens, and this is becoming a new normal. I wouldn't consider this necessarily normal, and especially in relation to young people, but it is true that we have to adapt, and in future we know that there will be a lot of more opportunities to change your job, but even if you don't change your job, the composition of job tasks will change. At least half of those tasks which we're handling now, in future, they are likely to be altered, digitalized or not, but they are likely to be different. So therefore, reskilling and upskilling opportunities, this is the key. This is actually basically the key concept of when we speak about lifelong learning, providing these opportunities for adult workers. So it's not really education for the lifetime, so what we call front loading of a qualification, what we used to do. We get the qualification, we go to the labor market, and we continue with that qualification for the whole life, and that doesn't work anymore. And if we think it hasn't been working for quite some time already, but even in future it will become even more acute, and therefore all these opportunities and access to learning opportunities for all workers becomes so important.
Okay, so your son is 30, my son is 17.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of skill, what can he expect in terms of his training cycle in his life, and what kind of skills do you think he should concentrate on, soft skills and hard skills?
Yeah, this is what I think what you said is exactly right. It's soft skills and hard skills. So it's a combination of skills which are foundational. So the foundational skills, when we speak about them, these are those skills that provide the foundation for future learning. So this is literacy, numeracy, and nowadays we also speak about digital literacy or environmental literacy and so on. But then also soft skills, so we call them actually core employability skills. We call them this way because they provide a very good opportunity for workers to transfer from one job to another, from one sector to another, and even between countries. And these are, that's why they're called portable. So these are the skills such as, we all know them, teamwork, leadership, coordination, creativity, critical thinking. But also management skills, leadership skills, this type of skills. And then, of course, a combination of these soft skills with technical skills. So it's not really either or. This is something I would like to underline. The reason why we put more emphasis on core skills is because they are portable and they provide a kind of advantage for workers, making them more employable across different jobs. So in case they will lose their jobs, this is something what they can use for a new job. But technical skills are also very important. And of course, there is a lot of discussion about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but it doesn't affect only higher education. It's also middle skill level, those workers who are trained in vocational education training, because technologies, they are of course innovated, but then we need also people who would be able to create a business case out of those technologies, implement them, and then we need workers who would be able to operate those technologies and maintain them. So these are also workers in manufacturing and construction and so on.
So, a reminder to our viewers, if you're just joining now, that we're talking about skills for the future of work. This is a key topic of the Global Commission's report on the future of work. If you want to know more about that report, you can go on the ILO website and find the report right there. Olga, throughout this week, we've been showing different videos about the impact that the ILO has on the ground, the different projects, how the ILO makes a difference in people's lives. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, what is the ILO doing to help countries implement skills training?
So we work with mostly low-income and middle-income countries. Really, our priority are low-income countries, and a lot of them are situated in Africa, in Asia. And we try to implement a complex approach where we help countries to anticipate skill needs for the future, identify those skills which are needed now, and also from the perspective of what will make, for example, a specific sector where we work more competitive, more productive, or increase their export potential, or improve their sustainability. So it's really in a broader mix of policies as we discussed. And we help them by the means of capacity development for our constituents, but also a lot of institution building or institutional development, because the key, of course, is partnership, as was discussed this morning during the thematic debate, and social partnership primarily. And that's why we need platforms where employers, workers, governments, education training providers can discuss what will be the skills needed in this specific sector or nationally, what kind of policies we can introduce, whether these are skills development policies through vocational education training, perhaps it's a vocational education training reform, which also help countries to implement. For example, in Bangladesh, there is a project where we have been implementing vocational education and training reform already for quite some years. So part of the institution building there was also building sectoral bodies, sectoral skills bodies, which provide this platform for the discussion on the skills which are needed and will be needed in the future, and then deciding together what will be the measures which need to be implemented. And then we also look at the social inclusion. So, for example, we work also on recognizing skills of migrant workers, providing training to workers before they go to work abroad, and also trying to help them to recognize their skills upon their return and reintegrate back in countries where they come from, for example, in Ethiopia. Or looking at specific sectors, like, for example, digital sectors, and identifying skills for the digitalization of the economy in Senegal, and then helping young girls to skill themselves in order to meet and also to reach the potential of the digital economy in Senegal.
Thank you, Olga. I think we have time for one more question, and this one is actually coming from Facebook, from one of our users. I'll ask you if we can be a bit brief on the response. It's from Rosemary. It's a question/comment. She says, lifelong training is not provided by all employers. There's a distinction between a company that has a research development and training division as opposed to the public service that does not have internal learning mechanisms, and whether the technology is being used or channeled in a direction that will advance the interests of all. So I guess the question is, how can we ensure that lifelong training is something that's accessible to all workers?
Well, of course, today during the discussion, during the thematic debate, it was underlined that companies have to become even more proactive. They do realize the potential of workforce and the need to train. And one of the speakers said every company should become a training institution, and every large company become a university. I really love that declaration. But we have to recognize that businesses alone cannot really resolve the problem. Workers will have to engage into training as well, and for this we need a lot of innovation and policy, making incentives and motivation, building them the way so that workers can actually tap on those opportunities, apply for co-funding of their training, for example, from central funds, or get credits through individual learning accounts. We have some examples in countries such as France, or the fund for workforce development fund, such as in Singapore. So there is a lot of innovation happening out there, and I think we have to learn from that and also mix the skills development policy with social protection so that people can actually withdraw from their work for some time and engage into training with counseling and guidance and efficient employment services in place.
Okay, thank you very much, Olga. And we're going to wrap up the first interview of the day today. Thank you very much. We will now go to, where do we go, Sophie?
Well, thank you very much, Olga. And now it's time for the first of today's dispatches from our roving correspondents around the conference. And today we're going to hear from Dia and Judith, who've been speaking to some of the participants in yesterday's forum on child labour.
Concrete inputs in terms of how children are still working in the rural economy, and that is one area that needs a lot of strong action so that children are not trapped in that sector. So how do you see the space evolving, and what kind of steps do you need governments and civil society, NGOs, ILO to take so that children are lifted out from forced labor in agriculture sector?
I think for us the really important message is that we need that policy coherence, the recognition by all concerned that agriculture, rural areas is still the biggest user of child labour, as we heard today, 70% still there, and not seeing the decline that we're seeing in other sectors. Yeah. So it's really important that we have that focus, that agreement in common that it needs to be tackled. Then I think it's a combination of measures. We do need the legislative framework. I think that's really important, the minimum age, the governments to ratify and to implement the convention. I think that was one of the other strong messages from the forum today. Yeah. But I think it was also very interesting that the forum brought together more local solutions. And we've also had good experiences when we mobilize communities. We have child labour-free villages. So we use peer pressure as well to change the mindset. And I think for us that's particularly important in the small farmer communities. In terms of global supply chains, it's also very, very much an area of work that we're engaging with transnational companies to get them to take responsibility for their supply chains and to make sure they don't have child labour in those chains.
Okay. Tell us, how did you become involved with the ILO? I mean, we know it, but for our viewers, so that we get a little bit of...
Well, my organisation is a global trade union organisation, and we have this very long name, but we represent workers throughout the food chain, agriculture, food processing, hotels, tourism, and in tobacco. And as such, we're part of the constituency of the ILO, so we work very much with the ILO. And I think one of the really interesting things for us is, and I was looking at one of the ILO publications on this, when the ILO was first formed, there was a discussion about should rural workers be covered. And then in 1921, with the adoption of Convention 11 on freedom of association for agricultural workers, that principle was established. So historically, the ILO has been an important partner for us in trying to address the power imbalance in rural areas.
It's really interesting that you bring up history, and that brings me to the last question. This is the Centenary Conference. So tell us your personal message on making sure that there is no child labour.
If we're going to talk about sustainability, if we're going to talk about really changing the model of production, then that model has to be built on a child labour-free future for everybody.
Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you for your time.
Bueno, en los 100 años de la OIT yo fui a buscar la historia que tenía que ver, por ejemplo, la OIT y los niños. Y descubrí que en el primer año, cuando se fundó la OIT, ellos hicieron, la mayoría eran hombres, hicieron un convenio, el número 5, donde ya hablaban contra el trabajo infantil. 30, 40 años después trabajaron también en otro convenio, el convenio 38, donde hablaba también sobre la prohibición de trabajo infantil. Y hace 20 años, el año 1999, se trabajó entonces el convenio 182, donde tenemos ahora un gran desafío, que es de sacar, no me acuerdo los números, pero me parece casi 150 millones de niños, de estos 75 o 73 millones trabajando en situaciones muy peligrosas. Es duro decir eso, pero el gran desafío es erradicar realmente el trabajo infantil, de cualquier tipo de trabajo. Niño no es para trabajar, niño es para jugar, para estar en la casa, para estar en la escuela, para tener salud. Entonces pienso que el gran desafío que una entidad como la OIT, que este año hace sus 100 años, es de hecho erradicar este tipo de trabajo. Participar de un foro tan importante como ese, donde habla sobre la eliminación de trabajo infantil, es muy importante para que aquí en la OIT, donde están empleadores, gobiernos y trabajadores, oír las mensajes que fueron colocadas. De mi parte, como sindicalista, representando dos grandes sindicatos, un nacional, que é a CUT de Brasil, e a ISP, que é um sindicato global, penso que a principal mensagem que nós, trabalhadores e trabalhadoras, devemos deixar num fórum como este, é que somos negociadores de trabalho decente, de empleos dignos. E quando falamos sobre isso, queremos dizer que para emprego, para trabalho, não cabe neste mundo um ninho, uma ninha. Então, a ideia de quando a ONU empieza a debater o Objetivo de Desenvolvimento Sustentável, onde habla sobre o 8.7, onde habla sobre a eliminação de trabalho infantil, isso, para nós do movimento sindical, é muito importante que nós tenhamos um papel fundamental quando falar com os governos, com os empregadores, que não se pode pensar em trabalho infantil, niñas e niños, como é a maioria dos niños que trabalham na agricultura, que trabalham na terra, de sol a sol, sofrendo muito, niños e niñas que trabalham no setor textil, niños e niñas que trabalham em comércio, niños e niñas que trabalham na informalidade muito grande em la calle. Então, isso não se pode, já não admitimos isso com pessoas adultas, que queremos a total proteção social. Então, nós como sindicalistas, a mensagem que queremos dizer é não ao trabalho infantil. E necessitamos dizer que mais importante é pensar como está numa organização como essa, como a OIT, a importância de pensar o diálogo social, onde os trabalhadores e trabalhadoras vão pensar juntos com empregadores e governos, como temos um mundo mais justo, mais igualitário, e que os niños tenham seu trabalho solamente de jogar, de fazer coisas buenas, de sonhar, e não no trabalho. Eu creio que o grande rol do movimento sindical, como disse a primeira pergunta, é a negociação. Esse é nosso papel, negociar. Quando não conseguimos isso, vamos à huelga. Isso fazem os sindicalistas. Penso que neste tema sobre trabalho infantil, onde não deve ter sindicalizados bebês ou crianças ou niños, falando um pouco em meu idioma português, é que os sindicatos têm que fazer campanhas, como a CUT de Brasil ha feito uma campanha, creio que no ano 2012, 2013, onde preparou um libreto falando sobre todas as formas de trabalho infantil, principalmente os peligrosos, e creio que este trabalho, para además da negociação, é um trabalho com a classe trabalhadora, com os trabalhadores campesinos, principalmente onde estão os niños e niñas da classe trabalhadora que tem esse tipo de trabalho, é de trabalhar uma educação mesmo, de formação, para que não permitamos que nenhuma criança, nenhum niño tenha que trabalhar las trabajadoras de hogar muitas vezes são niñas. Então, creio que o papel nosso como sindicato, para além deste papel de negociar, como já disse várias vezes, é fazer educação com sua base trabalhadora. Esse é o desafio que temos que pensar no diálogo social. Creio que a OIT tem que pautar, poner em sua agenda quase todos os anos este debate, hasta que não tenhamos mais nenhum ninho ou ninha trabalhando neste mundo, nesse planeta.
Welcome back to the ILC Daily Show. We're live from ILO.org and also live on Facebook. Those were our colleagues Dia and Judith who spoke to some of the delegates here at the ILC about child labor. Now, as every day we've been bringing you the global tour, the highlights of the global tour. This was a big event that the ILO organized on April 11th, 24 locations across 24 hours. We started in Suva in Fiji and we finished 24 hours later in Lima in Peru. Today we want to bring you the highlights of the event that took place in Cairo.
Now it's time for a song dedicated to the International Labour Organization by Bushra, a book and a toy.
كتاب ولعبة مع الفنانة الرائعة بشرى.
كل صوت بيرد حاضر من سكات يا واد يا مجدع وانت يا بنت البنات يا شقيانين من الفجر عاللقمة الحلال جوا الغيطان وفي المصانع والحارات يا كفوف بريئة صغيرة الدنيا مهما تغيب ترجع أكيد متزوقة وبكرة جاي يضحك لكم باب الفرح يفتح لكم بكرة جاي يضحك لنا باب الفرح يفتح لنا طول ما انتوا قادرين تضحكوا في عز الشقاء يا كل صوت بيرد حاضر من سكات يا ود يا مجدع وانت يا ست البنات مع كل واحد قال نسيك في 1000 واحد حس بيك ومعاك لحد ما تفتح الدنيا في عينيك تضحك لها وكلك أمل تفتح إيديك جنب العمل يضحك لها ضحكة أمل يفتح إيدينا مع العمل لكتاب ولعب وحياة كريمة تليق عليك يا كل صوت بيرد حاضر من سكات يا ود يا مجدع وانت يا ست
وساعتها ينتصر الحلم بالعمل والعلم زي ما حققت الحضارة الأولى أروع إنجازات الإنسان وكتب الإنسان الأول أعظم دستور يحمي حقوق الإنسان والعمل على الأرض.
بسم الله الواحد الأحد أقسم أني أنا المصري أحترم الحق وأديه لصاحبه وإني أعمل بضمير أحترم نفسي دايما ما بصش على حاجة مش بتاعتي، وعمري ما أكون كسلان. أقسم أني ما سيبش حد جعان ولا أبيته زعلان. أقسم أن أقدس العمل والأخلاق والجمال، ولا أقتل الأحلام ولا أظلم الإنسان أو الحيوان، وأن أعمل بضمير.
بعد السنين ما عدت سافر علان عبر الزمان، عايز يقابل حفيده، جايز يقدر يفيده.
اسمك، سنك، عنوانك.
اسمي فلان الفلاني، أنا شاب في عز شبابي، أرض الأمان دي بلادي.
مالك، من إيه بتشكي؟
زهقان زعلان قرفان، أحلامي قدامي حيطان.
عرفني بنفسك.
أنا إنسان وتاهت مني أحلامي، تاهت مني أحلامي، مستني الأيام تنصفني. أحلامي أفكاري ممكن توصلني لأمان.
هايل، وإيه كمان؟
ما حدش عايز يساعدني وما حدش بقى يقدرني، مع إني ممكن أغير الكون، بس لو حد يقدرني لو أقدر أكون.
تكون أو لا تكون دي حريتك الشخصية.
إزاي؟
دورك في الدنيا أنت اللي بتكتبه بمنتهى الحرية. يعني لك مطلق الحرية أن تكون أو لا تكون، أن تكون حر أو ضحية، أن تكون ناقما أو راضيا مرضيا، لكنك تأبى أن تختار، فتسب الظروف والآخر والأقدار، وترفض أن تصدق أنك أنت من اخترت دون اتخاذ أي قرار.
إزاي وكل الظروف ضدي، أنا نفسي أكون بحلم.
أيوة، بتحلم بإيه؟
بحلم بقصر كبير، بحلم بعربيات كتير، وطيارة خاصة بتطير. نفسي أعيش عيشة الأمير.
ده حلم خطير،
لكن إيه؟
حلمك حلم أناني. لازم تحلم بالخير، بس الإنسان تاني. الآخر يا إنسان هو مفتاح الأمان.
إزاي؟ مش فاهم.
حلمك ده مش حلم، ده بس نجاحه.
إزاي؟ فهمني.
أجدادك يا إنسان حلموا يوصلوا الأرض بالسماء، بنوا أهرامات ومعابد، نحتوا تماثيل وزرعوا فدادين. كان حلمهم يوصلوا نور السماء بالأرض ويكونوا نور لكل البلاد.
وإزاي عملوا كده؟
بالعمل. العمل يا ابني سر نجاح الإنسان والحضارات والأكوان.
بس أنا مش عارف إيه هو العمل اللي يناسبني وإيه الحلم اللي يوصلني.
اللي اتخلقت عشانه تلاقيه جواك، كل ما تبعد يندهك. ممكن تلف العالم كله وبرضه حلمك يرجعك.
ولو مش لاقي حلمي أعمل إيه؟
تدور عليه. حلمك لو بقى عملك وفي إيدك علمك، تقدر تغير الكون بإيديك. بس الأول غير نفسك. خلي إيزيس تحكي لك وتقولك.
إيزيس؟ اشتغل حتى لو
اشتغل عشان تكون
اشتغل عشان تقوم
عشان وجودك
مربوط بجهودك
ده شرفك كإنسان لأنك إنسان.
قصدك يعني القيمة مش في المال، مش في الصيت ولا في المشي جنب الحيط.
القيمة مش في المال، مش في الصيت ولا في المشي جنب الحيط. القيمة في العمل بخدمة الإنسانية، بحلم غرقان في ضميرك تزرعه يطرح مصيرك. نعشاق العلم والعمل ياما عشان نحيا بكرامة، أنا وإنت وكل الإنسانية.
So that was a look at the global tour as done by the ILO office in Cairo. Fantastic, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember that day very well. In Cairo, we had one of our Deputy Director Generals, Musumairo, Deputy Director General for Field Operations. I think we saw some images. And if you want to watch the whole event, if you have 24 hours to spare, you can go on the ILO website and watch the full 24 hours or any one of the 24 events separately.
Although I have to warn you that the other 23 hours don't benefit from a backdrop of the pyramids of Egypt. But they're still pretty good anyway. Anyway, let's move on. The Daily Show studio here at the ILC is part of a much larger communications exhibition. And we've already featured some of the facilities here. There's a virtual reality stand and there's a big thematic display. Yesterday, the ILO Director General paid us a visit, and so here's a snapshot of how that went.
And that was ILO Director General Guy Ryder, who was visiting this stand yesterday. Now we want to bring you another one of our dispatches. Our two colleagues, Dia and Marco, they spent some time in the second discussion yesterday that focused on freedom of association and collective bargaining. These are the forums, the discussions that are taking place upstairs in the Human Rights Chamber. And Dia and Marco had time to catch up with some of the participants, so let's take a look at what they had to say.
Je suis ici avec M. Mohamed Rebelsi, ministre des Affaires sociales de Tunisie. Bienvenue à l'émission quotidienne de la Cité, monsieur. Merci. Monsieur, vous venez de participer dans un forum sur la liberté syndicale et les droits des négociations collectives. Quels étaient vos messages principaux?
Je pense que le dialogue social, non seulement est une pratique syndicale ou pratique exercée par les syndicats, par les organisations des employeurs pour régler des problèmes de relations de travail, mais c'est devenu également une nécessité pour le développement. Surtout dans les pays en voie de développement. Je pense que le dialogue social est également un facteur pour le développement, pour la démocratie, pour répondre à la démocratie, pour défendre la démocratie. On ne peut pas justement prévoir un dialogue social sans un contexte démocratique. En plus, le dialogue social contribue à asseoir une véritable démocratie. Et on ne peut pas imaginer également une liberté syndicale sans le droit à négocier, sans le droit au dialogue social. Et ce dialogue social doit être régi par des lois, doit être institutionnalisé dans des structures reconnues et bien sûr, il ne faut pas mettre des restrictions ou des limites à ce dialogue social qui doit toucher à tous les problèmes qui touchent de près ou de loin l'entreprise, les travailleurs ou l'ensemble des populations qui vivent dans des situations précaires. Donc il y a ici un rôle très important que l'Organisation internationale du travail doit jouer pour défendre les droits syndicaux et particulièrement le droit au dialogue social et pour venir en aide aux partenaires sociaux pour renforcer leur capacité à bien mener ce dialogue social, à institutionnaliser le dialogue social, mais également à soutenir les travailleurs, les organisations de travailleurs ou les organisations patronales contre toute atteinte aux libertés syndicales.
Monsieur, quel rôle joue la liberté syndicale et la négociation collective en Tunisie, surtout depuis 2011 ?
Le dialogue social en Tunisie, bien sûr, il a ses origines, ses traditions, mais je pense qu'après la révolution de 2011, ce dialogue social est en train de se développer dans un autre contexte, un contexte de démocratie, de liberté, et cela justement va accélérer le processus de son institutionnalisation. C'est pour cela qu'on a créé le Conseil national du dialogue social. Ce Conseil national du dialogue social est un conseil tripartite et dans les statuts stipule que ce dialogue social au sein de cette institution ne doit pas se limiter justement à trouver des solutions sur des conflits sociaux, mais également cette institution est devenue une force de proposition. C'est devenu une force d'anticipation. Nous ne devons pas nous limiter à gérer les problèmes issus de choix politiques ou de programmes économiques, mais justement ce Conseil national du dialogue social est appelé à jouer un rôle beaucoup plus vaste, beaucoup plus intéressant, et ce justement en proposant des lois, en proposant des solutions aux problèmes socio-économiques, mais également à anticiper des problèmes pour trouver des solutions aux problèmes économiques et sociaux en Tunisie.
Merci,
I'm now going to interview Mark Leemans, who is the president of the Confederation of Christian Trade Unions and also the vice president of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD. I'm going to get his thoughts on collective bargaining and freedom of association. Mr. Leeman, as you had said, the world of work is rapidly changing. How will we, define collective bargaining and freedom of association in the coming century?
Yes, freedom of association and collective bargaining are the two pillars of the ILO, because we agree jointly, employers and workers, that everyone must be free to organize himself in an association and to have the possibility, the right to negotiate, to collective bargain. Of course, those two elements, freedom of association and collective bargaining, are very interlinked and are really in close relationship with the contractual labor. But now we see the appearance of new forms of labor. Platform economy, gig economy, freelancers and so on. You can name it in a different way, but people without a real contract with an employer. And how are we going to organize ourselves in the future to give the voice also, the negotiating voice to those people? How will they be able to associate themselves and how will they get the right to organize and the right to collective bargaining? And that is the big challenge in the future.
And what were your main messages to the panel on freedom of association and collective bargaining?
Well, organizations have to adapt themselves. I come from a union which is organizing a new service. We call it United Freelancers. We are not only a union for people with a fixed contract or even another contract form, a daily contract. No, we also want to defend the interests of workers without a real working relationship. People who are offering their services on platforms, for instance, or via apps. Also, those people must have the right to defend their interests, to defend their labor rights.
So this is very interesting what you mentioned, in terms of, new forms of workers who are emerging. Now, in developing countries, you see there is increased informalization. Most of the times, the trade unions tend to overlook the informal economy. What would be your message so that, there is stronger attempts to, mobilize workers in the informal economy?
I think the big challenge will be to make more transnational collective bargaining, because if we try to do it on a national level, we see that companies want to get rid of those national borders or national frontiers. For instance, this platform economy, where is it located? It's everywhere and nowhere. So we need to find really means to organize collective bargaining in a transnational level so that the fundamental labor rights are applicable to all people. People with a labor contract or with a so-called labor contract or a disguised labor contract, we need to organize it in a decent and proper way. Otherwise, we will have more social dumping and indeed the reappearance of informal work even in well-developed Western economies. And this is not a way to go forward.
And how can workers be made better aware about their rights? How many a time they don't know about their rights. What role do trade unions and workers' organizations have to make workers better aware about their fundamental rights and principles?
This is a joint responsibility. It's a responsibility for trade unions. They have to inform as much as possible their affiliates, but also the people who are not affiliated. But it's also a responsibility for the other social partners, for the employers and for the governments, because the labor rights, the fundamental rights which are recognized in the ILO, are rights which are coming from a tripartite basis. So it's a joint responsibility. It's a responsibility for the trade unions, but not only. It's also a responsibility for the employers' organizations and for the government, because if we are weakening the system, if people don't see the added value of the system, it will mean regression for everyone. And the way forward is to make more coherent agreements and really to make new forms of collective bargaining wider than a national basis, transnational, even global if possible.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lehman, for your time. Thank you.
So that was Dia and Marco, two of our roving correspondents covering the conference. And if you're at the conference in the Palais des Nations, you may well meet them in the next few days. So please feel free to express your views and help them out with their reports. They'll be back with us again on Monday. So this morning's thematic panel was on skills for the future of work, and a crucial part of that is obviously to do with youth employment. Later on, in a minute, our senior youth employment specialist and a youth advocate on youth employment will be joining us. So if you have any questions for them, please send them in on Twitter or on Facebook, and we'll do our best to include them in the interview. But before we go to that live interview, we want to give you a bit of background on the global initiative for decent jobs for youth.
Si eres joven como yo y andas buscando trabajo, debes saber que no es nada fácil.
Nous sommes 3 fois plus susceptibles que les autres d'être au chômage. Almost 73 million of us are looking for a job worldwide.
Y los empleos que encontramos son por lo general temporales, de baja paga o incluso sin pago.
It's not just a worry for us, but for societies and economies everywhere.
Nosotros somos el futuro.
Nous sommes l'avenir. We are the future. Mais sans travail, comment peut-on devenir le leader de demain?
The thing is, we actually have the solutions. The Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth is the first ever UN system-wide effort to come together and tackle this challenge. It will build on the interventions that have already been proven to make a difference for youth employment, share these ideas and put them into action in regions and countries around the world. From fragile states to the developed world, rural or urban, we can assist youth in preparing for the jobs of today, as much as for those of the future. By coordinating our know-how and our resources, we can help achieve the targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We know what works. Let's make it happen.
C'est notre futur, alors on s'y met. It's our future too. Let's make it work.
Together, we can make it work.
Thank you very much. We're back. We just saw a video about the Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth. And if you want to know more about that initiative, you can go on the ILO website, ilo.org. But now we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about youth employment. And with us are Susana Puerto, Youth Employment Specialist from the ILO, and May Maki, Research and Program Officer at the Arab NGO Network for Development. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being in the show. Susana, let me start with you. We hear often about the high levels of youth unemployment, but we know that for some youth, unemployment is just the tip of the iceberg. What is the real dimension of the youth employment challenge in the world?
Yes, indeed, and thank you so much for having us. So, indeed, there are 59 million young people unemployed around the world, but when we say that this is just the tip of the iceberg, it's because there are many other young people that are employed but in situation of working poverty. So today we have around 136 young people that are working but poor. And further than that, we have about 255 million young people that are not in employment, education or training, the so-called needs of this generation. So of course there are several areas that one could discuss when it comes to those challenges, thinking that it's not only about the lack of the quantity of the jobs, but it's also about the quality of the jobs. So when we speak about the needs, for example, we know that the majority of the needs are young women. We know that many of those young women are either out of work or out of school, and that when they are out of the labor market, they tend to stay out. So it's, let's say, the scaring effects of unemployment and discouragement may be long-lasting. So this is important to bring into consideration, and also to think that when it comes to the low quality of the jobs, many young people today are in the informal economy. So many. When we look at in developing countries, it's about of young workers, 70% of them or more could be engaged in the informal economy. So the challenges are big, and it's important to open the scope and think beyond unemployment into other challenges that young people are facing in the labor market.
Thank you. Yes, indeed a huge challenge. Just a reminder to our viewers that if you want to send in your questions via Twitter or Facebook, you can do so. We're already receiving some questions, which we'll put to both Susana and May. May, let me turn to you now. Susana was just speaking about the global challenge, or the challenge at the global level. Can you tell us a little bit about the youth employment challenge in the Arab states?
Okay, so thank you for having us here. First, I would like to clarify that I'm also here speaking on behalf of the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. So regarding the Arab world, I would like to speak about youth employment challenges from the point of view of three important transitions that the region is going through. So first, we have the transition from carbon to green economy. We cannot call a job decent if it's not green, just like a colleague at the Major Group said. Secondly, we have the transition from war to peace. The region now is going, hopefully, through a peace transition process, which puts us in front of a great challenge, which is dismantling the war economy. The youth in the Arab states have been integrated in the war economy. Conflicts have put them in front of two pathways, either the informal economy, which was already expanding because of the crisis, or violence. So it is indeed a major challenge if we want to talk about sustainable transitions to a decent work. And finally, we have also a lot of states who are now dealing with the effect of the policy choices that were made decades ago, now are being topped by austerity measures to fight the debt crisis. which are curbing down the expansion of the economy, the creation of new jobs, and of course social protection. So, if I may add, so in 2016 we had the UNDP Human Development Report that said we need to create 60 million new jobs by 2020 if we want to stabilize the youth unemployment. So this means that now we need to look at really structural changes and policy changes that bring meaningful change in our economies.
I mean, that's a massively tough challenge, obviously. I mean, you heard the discussion this morning on jobs and skills for the future. From your perspective, how do you think that discussion got on in addressing the issues that you're concerned about, of which obviously job creation is one?
Okay, so mainly the discussions today targeted the creation, building of skills and training for the transformations that are going, especially in terms of digitalization and technology. So what I would like to emphasize is that it's not enough to speak about creating jobs. We need to speak about creating decent jobs. We need to challenge the notion that a bad job is better than no job at all. And the idea that we need to secure jobs first and then transition into a decent job. So, and also what I would like to say is that essentially this should be a discussion on the creation of decent jobs and not just building the skills of workers for existing jobs. So this needs to be connected to a broader discussion on sustainable livelihoods, on education that promotes sustainable development and that promotes peace.
Susanna, one of the things about getting young people into hopefully decent jobs is they have to make that jump from education and training, from school into work. And I think I've heard it said that this is a point at which a lot of them fall off the path. What can we do to make that school to work transition better and easier and more successful for young people?
So indeed, this is a very central element of the ILO declaration. At least it came strongly in the report from the Global Commission. And one of the, to understand what is ILO's take on this, we need to go back a little bit into 2012 when in this same tripartite family we approved, or the government's employers and workers adopted the resolution for the call, it's called the Call for Action for Youth Employment. So the resolution provides a framework that nicely sets key priority areas to address and facilitate the transition towards decent work. So it's important to reflect that this applies to transitions from school to work, but there might be many other transitions that young people experience in the labor market, from wage employment into self-employment, from war and conflict into employment as well. So the call for action identifies 5 key elements. The first element is something that actually May mentioned this morning in the session, and it's about pro-employment macroeconomic policies. So the importance of really strengthening the policies and the frameworks giving, that give really birth to sustainability and validation to those policies. The second area is investing in employability skills. So very much supporting the idea of transitioning from school to work. The third area is about active labor market policies and labor market policies in general. So it touches as well on the job creation aspect and the importance of finding effective policy measures like wage subsidies or different measures that can create incentives among employers to hire young people. And the fourth policy or area is about entrepreneurship and self-employment, and it's important to pinpoint here that it's about sustainable self-employment, that we don't want to push young people into businesses when we see that those businesses may not survive. So it's important to strengthen the skills of young people to survive in businesses and then work in facilitating an environment that will allow those businesses to grow. And last is about the rights. So a couple of weeks ago, we had the annual conference of Decent Jobs for Youth in relation to the video that the viewers saw before the interview. And the main focus of the conversation was around rights and voices. with the idea that the rights-based approach is something that creates, allows sustainability of investments, youth employment investments. So making sure that young people have the opportunity to build and have a meaningful exposure into the labor market, that their voices are heard, that they have access to representation both in bodies of trade unions and employers' organizations. So all of these sort of can give you a perspective of ILO's take in supporting that transition. And of course there are several examples, and I would like to quickly just mention that in Africa in particular we are looking into opportunities, working with our partners, particularly with the International Telecommunications Union, looking into the opportunities to boost youth employment in the digital economy. So this is something that is important, that is not only about digital skills, it's really about bringing the benefits of the digital economy to young people.
Another issue that's related to youth employment is the issue of gender equality, and because we know that gender inequality it's more prominent when it comes to youth, amongst youth, and this is one of the key issues that's touched on not only by the report of the Global Commission on the future of work, but it's also one of the topics that's been discussed at this conference as part of a possible new declaration for the ILO. So if the issue of gender equality seems to be more prominent amongst youth, how can we change this? What can we do?
Okay, first it's important to note it is indeed more prominent among youth, but it is also connected to a broader gap that exists in society. So how we can challenge this, I mean, I can say that we need meaningful youth engagement in influencing policies to change this. And what I mean by policies is starting by the workplace, the policies that affect the workplace, including the simplest things like the setting of the office, to national policies about that provide women legally with rights and protection, and finally with structural economic policies that would change power structures and make a meaningful change.
And Susana, we have time for one more question, but I want to try to put two questions in one. The first one is coming from Twitter. And it says, it seems like young people would fall outside of the tripartite structure of the ILO. So how are their interests represented as stakeholders in your activities? That's the first question. The second one that I wanted to ask you, if you can say a few words, it's about the Global Youth Employment Forum that will take place in Abuja in August. If you can tell us a little bit about this event, what we can expect.
Thank you. Actually, I will try to address both at the same time. So there is a commitment in the office to enhance and boost meaningful participation of young people in our own work. So this is part of our commitment also within the UN Youth Strategy, where all UN entities have sort of agreed to strengthen the participation of young people. Now, that's on one hand. On the other hand, there is also a lot of dialogue and consultations with our social partners to make sure that we discover together strategies and opportunities to bring the voices of young people within their structures, and that we together commit into facilitating those voices. We know that we have heard young people say that many times that they participate in some of these structures, the average age of people within these organizations is quite high, no? Above 60 or something. So it's really hard for some young people to get their voices heard in this context. And it's important then that we all explore opportunities to support young people exercise those voices. What's coming up in Abuja on August 1st to 3rd is the Global Youth Employment Forum, which is organized by the ILO. The objective, of course, is to celebrate the Centenary, but it's also to celebrate 60 years of ILO's work in Africa. What we want to do is to work together with young people and many other stakeholders in looking critically at the call for action, what have been the different achievements, the challenges around the call for action and its implementation, and then invite young people's ideas and recommendations on how the ILO can strengthen that work with the time frame of the 2030 agenda. So very much an invitation. It's a global forum. We are bringing young people, 100 young people from all over the world to Abuja. So it's super exciting. It's a lot of work, and we are really looking forward to it.
Great. That sounds fantastic. I mean, it's going to be a very lively forum with 100 young people from all around the world. Yeah. Will hopefully really shake us all up and make us think our ideas again. Yeah. May and Susan, Anna, thank you very much. And we're going to stay with the issue of youth employment in Africa for just a little bit longer, because one of the areas in which the ILO works is to help young people discover their entrepreneurial skills. And in particular, we have a project in the Democratic Republic of Congo to help young people become entrepreneurs. Let's take a look.
On the outskirts of Lubumbashi, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the sounds of peeping in this shed is like music to the ears of Frank and Gautier. They're fattening up hundreds of young chicks before selling them for a decent price at the local market.
Thanks to the PAJEC project, we received training. We started with ideas. We needed business ideas. My friend called to tell me that he had seen my ideas and that they were the same as his. So why didn't we get together to run our project?
Both of these young entrepreneurs had a diploma in food production but had been unemployed for several years when they heard about the Activity Program for Youth Employment in Katanga, known as PAJEC in French. It was being run by the International Labour Organization with financial support from Belgium. The PAJEC program was designed to bolster young people's entrepreneurial skills. Frank and Gautier learned how to set up and run a business, then joined forces to submit a project for a chicken farm called the Kapjeko Cooperative. Their business plan was selected at one of the 3 competitions organized by the program, and they received a microfinance loan and technical support to start the business. Today, with 3 employees, Frank and Gautier raise about 100 chickens a month and have ambitious plans to expand the business.
We want to become a national leader in poultry production, because today we're raising about 100 chickens, but our target is to produce thousands. We also want to incorporate other poultry farmers, since we're a cooperative.
In a country where the majority of the population is under the age of 25, the PAJEC program developed occupational and entrepreneurship training with provincial partners to improve the employability of young apprentices. Over 1,000 young people have been trained in diesel mechanics, welding, crafts, and food production. The program has equipped more than 20 schools with computer rooms so that students can learn basic computer skills. Trainers from the program teach them word processing, spreadsheets, presentation tools, and how to use the internet.
This is going to be much more useful to me because today, to work in a company, you really have to know something about computers. Because with globalization, there are computers everywhere. I can do everything more easily with computers and find a job.
It liberates people in terms of work, because in today's world, computer tools are really necessary. When you live in an environment like this, it means a lot to the families you're already in contact with. It's really a huge contribution in social terms.
The students who finish the courses receive a certificate in computer studies. For these young people, this is not only a source of pride, but a genuine plus for their education.
One of our biggest concerns was really the long term, to ensure that the program of activities drove the momentum for change, and that the momentum for change could be sustained by the participants themselves and continue beyond the end of the PAJEC project.
For these young apprentices and school children, as well as for young entrepreneurs like Gautier, the project is a source of dignity that has opened the doors wide to possibility. Now Gautier and his young family can look forward with greater confidence in their working lives and their future.
about a project that the ILO has in the Democratic Republic of Congo to promote youth employment. Now we're going to switch subjects a little bit, and we're going to talk about another very important issue for the ILO, domestic workers. As you know, Sunday is International Domestic Workers Day, and with us today is Claire Hobden, the ILO expert on domestic work. Very welcome to the show, Claire. As we know, or as we said, Sunday is the anniversary of the well, actually, it's Domestic Workers' Day, which, if I understand correctly, marks the anniversary of the adoption of the Convention 189 on domestic workers. Could you please explain to us the importance of this date?
Sure. In 2011, the ILO adopted the Convention and Recommendation on Decent Work for Domestic Workers, and it was the first time that domestic workers were recognized as workers by an international standard. And it was this recognition that really has made the difference for domestic workers around the world, that they are included in the world of work as workers.
That's not a small issue, because up until that moment, domestic workers did not enjoy the same rights as any other workers, right? It was a huge historical decision that the ILO made.
That's right. The purpose of the convention is really to ensure that domestic workers enjoy rights equal to those of other workers. So in that sense, it's a real instrument to achieve equality, and especially for women, since so many domestic workers are women. And it's also an instrument for formalization, so it's saying that domestic work is real work and should be treated as such. They are caregivers, they're providing really crucial services to homes around the world, and so they should be enjoying decent working conditions and formal employment.
I think everybody who attended the ILC in 2011 can remember the celebrations when the convention was passed, Convention 189, how the domestic workers basically invaded the plenary room and unveiled banners, the big flag, and they surrounded one of our most popular photographs on the website is the then Director General, Mr. Sommerveer, surrounded by happy domestic workers. But that was 2011, and now we're in 2019. And the big test for any convention has to be, what difference does it make to the lives of the workers on the ground? Particularly when you have a group like this who work behind the scenes, who are generally unrecognized. So has it made a difference?
Well, I think ILO Convention 189 is one of the instruments that has been the most adopted by the workers themselves. So anywhere you go in the world, almost, you'll have a domestic workers organization that is holding Convention 189 as a banner for their own rights. So in that sense, it's been an absolutely essential tool for them around which to organize, to build support, and to gain recognition at the national level. Having said that, it's absolutely true that once the rights are adopted in law, there remains the issue of implementation. And we are concerned about the fact that domestic workers around the world are still either not recognized as workers, or they receive wages that are below the minimum wages. Most households don't see themselves as employers of domestic workers, and so it's a question also about changing the social norms at the ground level to make sure that every household in the world knows what their responsibilities are as employers of domestic workers, to make sure that they enjoy decent working conditions.
And once a government has adopted this convention, which we hope many governments will continue to do, how can governments ensure that this convention actually turns into reality for domestic workers? What are some of the actions that they can take?
Well, I think one of the important parts of the convention is basically saying that in many cases, domestic workers' unions themselves should be consulted when adopting national laws and policies. And the reason why this makes a difference in the lives of domestic workers is because they can actually provide crucial information on where they're seeing the barriers to implementation, where they're seeing some of the bigger challenges. Violence and harassment, which we're discussing at the ILC this year, is a huge issue for domestic workers around the world. But we're also seeing the real need for employers' organizations to participate in that dialogue, because we don't really fully understand yet what the needs and preferences of households that employ domestic workers really are. They're very rarely organized, and as a result, this also creates a barrier to implementation, since we don't really know how to adapt laws and policies such that it fits their needs and preferences.
Is there also an issue here of changing of public perceptions and attitudes to domestic workers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think increasingly governments have recognized that domestic workers should enjoy rights equal to those of other workers. Since the adoption of Convention 189, there are about 50 or 60 countries that have made concrete changes, either by ratifying the convention or by otherwise extending rights to domestic workers. And what remains now is shifting, exactly as you said, those social perceptions of domestic work at the ground level. At the end of the day, what we're really talking about is getting households to see domestic work not just as sort of informal, casual labor that they need to hire on the fly, but rather as an essential part of their household life, a professional service that they're contracting for the purpose of taking care of their loved ones and their most prized possessions. So really it's about raising the level of respect and profile of the domestic work sector as a fundamental part of the care economy.
Great. Thank you very much, Claire. If you want to know more about domestic work and what the ILO does and how it works on this issue, you can go to the ILO website, ilo.org, and there's a specific topic there which is called domestic work, and we invite you to take a look at that. Now, before we carry on, we want to show you a very short animation. It's about promoting the rights of domestic workers. So let's take a look.
Okay, that was a short look at the issue of the rights of domestic workers, a very important issue that the ILO works on. Now, let's move on and talk about what's happening at the conference this afternoon. We have a thematic forum which will focus on securing sustainable transitions over the life course. Now, one transition that's going to affect all of us is the transition to a green economy. This is going to require skilling, reskilling and upskilling. In a moment we'll be speaking to the head of the ILO's Green Jobs Unit, but before we do, let's hear a little bit more about why green jobs are so crucial for sustainable development.
Worldwide, there's been rapid urbanization and job growth, leading to more demand for resources and services. But this has come at a price. Climate change caused by gas emissions is harming the environment, amplifying natural disasters that cause destruction of homes and workplaces. The ILO's Just Transition Guidelines set out a roadmap to make our work greener. These guidelines present measures to foster a prosperous, environmentally sustainable society. A key part of this just transition is investing in green jobs that help to restore the environment and fight climate change. Green jobs mean a voice at work, equality, fair income, and safe working conditions. They are defined as decent jobs that are also good for the environment. Green jobs strive to increase dialogue between workers, employers, and governments. Together, they can create strategies, policies, and regulations for a greener and fairer economy. The ILO supports the creation of green jobs which help to improve energy efficiency, limit gas emissions, and minimize waste and pollution. They are a key part of climate change prevention, mitigation, and adaptation. By making our work greener, we can build a better, more sustainable future for women and men around the world.
That was a quick look at why green jobs are so important for sustainable development. Just a reminder, if you want to send us any questions or any comments, please do so through Twitter. You can see the hashtags behind me on the screen. That's ILO 100 or OIT 100. Now, we've been joined now by Mustafa Kamal Gay, who's head of the ILO's Green Jobs Unit. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start by asking you, the issue of climate change, how important is it? How on the effect it's having on labour markets?
Well, I think it's important to understand that there are two dimensions of climate change and how it impacts on the world of work. The first is that we see tremendous physical impacts of climate change. And one of them is just the recurrent typhoon, hurricanes that we see around the world, in the Philippines, in Haiti, in many parts of the world. So we have measured in the ILO that only between 2010 and 2015, 23 million working lives have been lost because of those physical impacts. And we've also tried to bring attention on something that is not being discussed a lot, which is the mere fact of having a warming temperature and what it would mean for work, the productivity of workers and enterprises. And in the ILO latest report, we've measured that with current patterns of warming, by 2030, it's about 2% on average of work time that will be lost. Now, 2% may not mean a lot. If you turn it into full-time equivalency of jobs, it is 72 million jobs. So therefore, the physical impacts and then the responses that governments are taking, the policies, they also have impacts on the world of work.
This all sounds very concerning, but I think it's also important to stress that there's a huge potential for job creation as well, isn't there, with the right policies?
Absolutely. I think, of course, there are concerns about this impact, but we all converge on a positive narrative. I think the narrative that the ILO and the constituents are putting forward is that it is not climate change or acting against climate change, it is rather inaction that will be destroying jobs. But action in itself will deliver more jobs. We have measured that just dealing with the putting in place measures to implement the Paris Agreement on climate change will create 18 million net jobs by 2030. So we are therefore on a positive narrative.
So action is key, right?
Absolutely. And actually, I wanted to go back to one of the things that you said before. As you know, Kamal, we have a global campaign bringing ILO to the people that we launched as part of this Centenary. You can see the posters around Geneva and different parts of the world. And we looked at 25 different topics on the world of work. One of them was green jobs. And if I remember correctly, the poster, it says, "The status quo is killing the planet. Green jobs are the way forward." And I know green jobs is something very important for us here at the ILO. Can you explain to our audience what we mean by green jobs?
By green job, we mean the way work is changing. On the one hand, the changes in the economy open up opportunities for more jobs in sectors where it is about decent work, but decent work that contributes to dealing with major environmental challenges, whether it is about fighting against climate change, fighting against air pollution, minimizing waste, deploying new sources of energy. So these are decent work in the primary sector, in manufacturing, in service industries, but in addition of being decent work, they help address environmental challenges. But globally, we see that it can happen in all economic sectors. Work will have to change, will have to be more efficient in the way energy is used, in the way a material is used, whether it is in renewable energies or in steel, all sectors of the economy, I should say.
If you're joining us just now, just a reminder that we're talking about green jobs, the jobs of the future. And we're talking to Mustafa Kamal Gay, the head of our ILO Green Jobs unit. And if you want to send any questions, please do so via Twitter or Facebook. You were just mentioning some of the sectors that we'll see where green jobs can be created in the future. What about developing and developed countries? Is it the same story when we talk about developed and developing countries, or is there a difference when we talk about green jobs and developed and developing countries?
Naturally, the impacts and the structural changes in economies will not be the same, because in the first place the nature of the economies and societies are not the same. What we see, for example, in the energy transition in the industrialized parts of the world is about moving away from a fossil-based energy system into clean energy system. So therefore, the potential job losses in coal mining, in oil and gas, and new job creation in renewable energy sectors. If you are in many developing parts of the world, there are still massive challenges of waste management, collection, and recycling. And so therefore, there's a huge potential for decent work creation in the waste management sector, in sustainable infrastructure, green construction, in agriculture, and so therefore there are differences, but I just want to reemphasize that in all cases we see a same positive narrative of decent and net job gains.
It's good to have a positive narrative out of this, because there's so much sort of depression and negative stories about climate change. But what I'd like to do here is join up a few of the strands that we've had this morning. We've been talking about youth, and we've talked a lot about skills. So what kind of skills do you think, particularly young people, but us slightly older people as well, what kind of skills are we going to need for a green economy?
I think we'll think of two types of skills. There are, in terms of the changes we see, there are parts of the economy where it is, the negative sides about job losses, and then one needs to redeploy those redundant workers, say from coal mining, oil and gas, into other sectors of the economy. So retraining, etc. But on the other side, it is the emerging economic sectors. For example, I see a lot of young people across Africa linking up innovation, digital innovation using ICT to facilitate access to clean energy. Where people would get an energy system, a home, solar home system, and make monthly payments through mobile money payments. Whereas in the old days, one would have to work kilometers just to pay 5 cents, etc. You see a lot of young people putting in place systems to monitor air quality in cities that don't have a whole system of air quality control, and selling that information as a commercial service. So therefore, these are new skills that are emerging, and in one way it's about reskilling, but in other, how do you enable young people to take advantage of these emerging opportunities, often with the digital economy as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to remind our readers that if you want to know more about green jobs, there's a lot of information on our website. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the work that the ILO is doing on this issue of promoting green jobs. Can you give us some examples of the projects and the activities that we have to promote this?
Well, the ILO works first to raise awareness. So, of course, most of our work is about social dialogue to come to that positive narrative. But then concretely, how do you support countries in green construction? The ILO has worked in Zambia on a very successful program to demonstrate the potential of sustainable housing using local material, integrating solar water harvesting, solar energy. We've worked in East Africa on a project we call the Youth Entrepreneurship Facility, supporting entrepreneurs using plastic waste and turning it into a post that now goes into construction in place of timber. So there are a number of projects like that the ILO has been involved around the world, and we see a big potential.
I know you have many questions. We all have many questions from Kamal, but this one is coming from Twitter, someone who's watching online. I think it's a very interesting question. He says, what about highly skilled workers, like petroleum engineers, for example, who've spent years and years developing their skills and are highly paid? They're not going to find green jobs that pay the same amount from one day to the next, are they?
Well, it is true. It's true that these redundant workers, or those moving within the labor markets from what we can call the fossil fuel-based sectors, may not have the same. And it is not just about the highly qualified workers. We find in studies that even workers in coal mining, which are very much organized, very unionized, have social benefits, they wouldn't get the same benefits if they move into renewable energy in small companies. So therefore, this is a challenge. How do you make sure that people don't lose their social benefits and level of income? And it must be addressed. I should say it's a very relevant question.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up now. Kamal, I want to thank you for coming, for taking the time, and remind our readers that our viewers and readers too, that if you want to know more about green jobs, there's a wealth of information on our website. Right now, we're going to go back to the issue that we started this show with, skills for the future of work. If you remember, this was the first discussion that took place in the morning upstairs in the Human Rights Chamber. One of the panelists was Angel Gurria, the Secretary General for the OECD. And before he went on that panel, our colleague Judith Carreras had a chance to meet up with him and ask him a few questions. Let's take a look.
Skills, upskilling, reskilling. We just published the Future Work, which is the employment outlook of 2019. We do one of these every day, but right now it's focused precisely on the very important challenges that present themselves in the combination of digital, the opportunities that digital presents, but also the challenges, because about 14% of the workforce are going to be displaced in the next 10, 15 years, but there's also 1/3 of the workforce that is going to be disrupted somehow. So basically you have about half of the workforce that is going to suffer the impact of the digitalization process. And therefore the concept of the future work really has to be perceived and has to be dealt with and has to be managed in this context in which the workplace, the workforce, the skills necessary to succeed are changing. And then, of course, it also requires a much closer coordination between the private sector, the productive sector, governments, trade unions, and the individuals themselves. In fact, I think the cooperation with the ILO and the OECD is a very good example of this type of collaborative efforts. We just had a ministerial meeting of the ministers of labor in the context of the G7, and they actually mandated. It was difficult to agree, even on the wording, but they mandated the ILO and the OECD to work together in order to look at the best ways in which there could be public policies to deal with these challenges of going forward in the digital age, but also with aging societies. How do you incorporate all the women? How do you incorporate the elderly? How do you incorporate the youth? How do you incorporate, all the workforce that needs to be on board, if you will, if you want to continue the growth prospects, the productivity prospects in many societies which are aging, or in some societies like the developing countries, where where the youth are massively represented, but they also have to have the skills, and that have to give that big step between the education and the workplace, and they obviously have to have the right skills. Happy anniversary. When you turn 100, it's very important, I have to say. We like round numbers, you know, so 100 is a date which is very important. You have to put this in perspective. We're talking about an institution that was created, you know, long before the United Nations. You're talking about an institution that, a multilateral institution, a multilateral architecture that already included the private sector, the trade unions, and the governments in a very, well, what I would say, a very intelligent and very good outlook on what was coming next and the type of coordination that you needed to address these things. So in many ways, it was a precursor of things to come. But I have to say, coming back to today, that we're delighted to be working with the ILO, with Guy Ryder in particular. He's a great leader of the ILO. He's somebody who is a real example of the type of, you know, he comes from the trade union movement, and at the same time was balanced enough and wise enough and enlightened enough to look at the balances between the different sectors. And right now, I think he's leading the ILO in a most effective way at a time when multilateralism is under a lot of pressure and being questioned in terms of whether it is still the way to go. And of course, we at the OECD are not only wishing him very well, but a lot of the success of the ILO will also be the success of all of us who very strongly believe that multilateral is indeed the way to go.
And we're back. That was our colleague Judith Carreras talking to the Secretary General from the OECD, Angel Gurria. Sophie, where do we go now?
We're going to stay with the issue of jobs and skills, Martin, because Judith Carreras has been very busy running around the conference, and she also got an interview with one of the other participants in this morning's thematic forum on jobs and skills. That's Thorben Albrecht, who's the Commissioner for the Global Commission and Federal Manager of Germany's Social Democratic Party. Let's hear what he had to say.
As the world of work is changing rapidly, so do skills requirements. To make sure that in the transition no one is left behind, we really have to make sure that skilling, reskilling and upskilling is available for everybody. And labor market issues do play a role. We always advocated active labor market policies saying if you become unemployed you should get help, you should get skilling. But I think this is no longer sufficient. We need proactive labor market policies, making sure that even if you are still in a job, but your job is endangered by changes, you need some skilling already then. We should move from an unemployment insurance to an employment insurance, which makes sure that you don't even lose your job. Maybe we can go even one step further and provide everybody with a universal opportunities account at the beginning of a working life. Rather than keeping people out of working life through a universal basic income, we could provide people with the time and the money to go through skilling, to maybe form a business with this account, which you can carry on through your working life. It is also important to get more equal opportunities for everybody and thus to fight inequalities for decent work for all. I think the ILO does play a crucial role when it comes to the world of work for tomorrow, because we can see changing patterns of globalization. We can see a platform economy emerging. And there's no other institution that could build a framework for this kind of work. If we have really global platforms working in different countries with a platform in one country and companies working with it in different countries as well as workers from all over the globe, we need, for example, an ILO convention on platform work, making sure that platforms are not another sector of informal work, but a sector of quality work, of better work, of decent work.
Okay, that was a view on jobs and skills from Thorben Albrecht of Germany's Social Democratic Party. And now let's have a look at the picture from Asia, and we'll go to Mary Liu Eng, who's president of the National Trade Union Congress of Singapore.
Hi, I'm with Mary Liu. She's the president of National Trade Union Congress, Singapore, and the general secretary, Singapore Maritime Officers Union. So I will be asking her a few questions. Welcome, Mary, for the Daily Show. And what were your main messages to the forum that you just attended?
Well, the forum that I've just attended is a very important one because it focuses on jobs and skills, and also a better prospect for the workers. So that is very important for us as well. And the message that I have is that to all our tripartite partners, that we need to up the social dialogue, because I think whatever wonderful plans that we may have in each of our country, it is important that we must have the social dialogue with our workers. And wherever we go into innovation, automation and all that, the engagement must be there with the workers. Because at the end of the day, at the beginning of the opening of the conference, I hear every speaker saying that labour is not a commodity. And I think it is important for us, in every policy that we make, we have to include our workers in there. And every workers matters.
Okay. Thank you, Mary, for that very insightful point. This brings me to another question, is that what future skills must our workplaces and even schools invest in to better prepare those in the workforce and those who will enter the labour force in coming times?
In the NTUC in Singapore, we actually look at Workers 4.0 because we believe that there will not be any Industry 4.0 if there isn't Workers 4.0. And in Workers 4.0, we are encouraging our workforce to take up skills that will be relevant to them for the rest of their lives. I think adaptive skills, for example. How do you help them to implement the change? How do you help them to manage the change? And how do you help them to be more adaptable in anything that they do? I think it has to start from the early stage in life as well. And we also talk about, besides having the adaptive skill, we also talk about technology. And to have the skills in technology, and this is something that is very vital in these days and age. And last but not least, we also talk about technical skills. And what is in school right now is I think it is very important for us, even as a labour movement, to work very closely with the Institute of Higher Learning. With that, we are actually sharing with them what are the needs, not only the current needs, but we are looking at the future needs as well. So to make it very relevant for our young people. So we have to keep that going, keep that dialogue going all the time.
Thank you, Mary, for the time. Thank you for joining.
That was Mary Liu Eng, president of the National Trade Union Congress of Singapore, talking to my colleague Dia Banerjee. Martin.
So, Sophie, we're getting close to the end of this ILC Daily Show, ILC Daily Show number 5. But before we do, we want to go back to one of the issues that we discussed at this show. The domestic workers, International Day on Domestic Workers is on Sunday, as we said before. On the 16th, it marks the anniversary of the adoption of the convention, the ILO Convention on Domestic Workers, Convention 189. So our goodwill ambassador, Wagner Moura, the actor from the series Narcos and many other famous movies, he works with us on the issue of forced labor and also to promote the work of the ILO. And he sent us a very nice and special message to mark International Domestic Workers on Sunday.
Let's talk about rights. Rights of nannies, housekeepers, elderly caregivers, these domestic workers who care for our families and our homes. They are workers, just like you and me. And they deserve fair wages, time to rest, social security, safety at work, and much more. Unfortunately, too many of them still get trapped and tricked into forced labor. So join me and the ILO in marking International Domestic Workers' Day by doing all you can to make sure your home is a decent workplace. And please ask your friends and families to do the same. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Wagner Moura, for that nice message. And with that, we've arrived at the end of show number 5.
Yep, so that's the end of Friday's show. We will be back with you on Monday. Let's have a quick look at what we've got for that. We're going to have an interview with the Managing Director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde. But mostly Monday is Technology Day. The technical forum, the thematic forum, will be on technology and the future of work. So we're going to be having some live interviews on that theme as well. So if you want to send us any questions, please send them by Twitter or by Facebook. You can see the hashtag to use. We hope to hear from you. We hope to make this a very participatory discussion. And with that, we wish you a very pleasant weekend. Goodbye from me, Sophie Fisher.
And goodbye from me, Martin Murphy.
Goodbye.